got a question for you. Did we re-record the intro while I was on paternity leave? Is Phil now in the intro?
We did not.
We didn't.
What I was thinking we should probably do on Friday, actually.
Sounds great.
We've been going intro and outro-less, which sounds way more scandalous than what it really is. Anyway, this is your intro. Welcome to the Day After Sunday. I am Reverend Phil Dickey, and I'm Phil Dickey. There we go. Throw it back.
There we go.
Yes. So I'm Rebecca, and if you all are joining us this morning, please let us know you're here. We love when people are watching along live. Let us know what you're up to this morning, how your Monday morning is starting out. And if you did not get a chance to worship with us yesterday, please check out our feed, our either YouTube channel or a Facebook Live feed, and just catch up with what we were doing yesterday. It was Lent number 5.
Yeah.
Lent number 5.
Lent 5. We are on the other side of Lent now. It is fast approaching Easter morning.
But it is. That sounded very Yoda-like. Easter morning fast approacheth does.
It comes every year. But before we get there, we've got Palm Sunday next week, a bunch of really great opportunities for Holy Week, Easter egg extravaganza that's socially distanced and RSVPs required, and then Easter morning will finally be upon us. So
should we try to put Easter eggs in our digital Easter eggs, like in all of our upcoming live worship things? We'll have little Easter eggs hidden. Dexter, I know you're back there producing. Let's make a note of that and make it happen. Can we get an Easter egg right now?
That's a very good idea.
Noted.
Dexter says noted.
Right, noted.
Yeah, the other thing that we have coming up between now and Easter is hopefully what might become a new tradition. It's the first year, so we can't really call it a tradition yet, but sure. John Stanford is he's finishing it today, and he's going to install it today, a big heart-shaped sculpture that we're going to install on our front lawn. So if you're driving down Old Gate, you'll see it right in front of the main sanctuary doors. And it's something that we want people to interact with, not once, but twice. So this coming weekend that you can stop by, and we'll have some palm branches available, and you can decorate the heart with palm branches for Palm Sunday. And then later in Holy Week, so next Friday and Saturday, which will be perfect if you're already here with your family doing the Easter pop-up, just stop by the heart, and then add some flowers to it in honor of Easter. So yeah,
it's gonna be great, and such a really cool public display, interactive piece, low threshold. I expect to see a lot of palm branches and a lot of flowers in front of our church. It's gonna be great.
And still socially distanced.
And still socially distanced. Yeah. So this Sunday was y'all, who picked this worship series?
That would be you, Mitchell. And let me remind you how it happened. Mitchell was going on paternity leave on a Tuesday, and on a Monday night, Phil and I get a text saying, "Hey, we're doing the last 24 hours of Jesus' life."
There was a little more heads up.
There were
two options.
Yeah. So it's been heavy. And I've had a lot of people kind of tell me that, and I admitted that in my sermon yesterday, right? It's a heavy series because there's not a lot of movement in the story. It's really crawling along. So we're kind of stuck here. And I think Victoria's Children's Time has been that moment of zen for us as we kind of move in and out of these weeks where Jesus is moving towards the cross. And so, Vic did a great job again this past Sunday. And hey, Phil, have we pulled her children's times out yet and put them in our playlist?
Yeah, if you go to our YouTube channel, you can now find a children's ministry playlist that has the last couple of weeks on there. Once we started doing this Blues Clues style, we started posting those on there. And so Dex has done a great job making those really interactive and fun. And so you can go on our YouTube channel and you can find the link there and check them out. Go back and watch all of them.
Yeah, it's so much. I mean, as any as any good teacher knows, right, you're never just teaching one single age group. If you're teaching well, then a lesson for adults is going to have something that teenagers and kids can relate to, and vice versa. If you're teaching well, then a lesson for kids is going to have something to say to adults as well. And so this notion of, I mean, I think it just ties in so perfectly with how we started Lent, which seems like forever ago when we were planting our seeds. You know, Victoria talked about this. We're so afraid of the dark in some ways. Yes, hashtag Lenten landscape. But it's so important. And Victoria, as she has such a green thumb, right? I mean, if you've never been to her office, she has plants everywhere. It's lush. It's beautiful. And she just pointed out, like, hey, if you uncover a seed, it's not going to grow. It's going to dry out and die. And so this notion of like darkness being important for us on our journey was really, really impactful for me yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we just don't like that. We're not naturally wired to look at darkness or to think of darkness as the absence of light, right? As a space where growth happens, because we can't see it usually. In fact, most of the time during the darkness, we're asleep, right? And so the world, what's really fascinating to me is like, sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and like overnight, weeds have just been popping up all over my backyard. And you wake up and you're like, how did this happen? Like, how did it move so quickly? And it's a reminder that like, there's so much activity that happens while we are asleep. And I think it's also a good word for the church. Like, there's so much that happens when we are not paying attention, when we are resting on the Sabbath, right? It's not that the world stops, it's that we stop so we can see the world move, right? And so I'm really like at a place where I'm having to like remind myself of that, especially in this Lenten season, because I'm exhausted when I'm awake. And it's kind of like one of those places where I think we've got to really trust that that things are happening buried deep beneath the soil. Clearly something happens when Jesus is buried, right? And we should, I think, extrapolate that out to everyday life that we're a part of.
Yeah. I want to return to what you said too, that this series doesn't feel like it has much forward motion. I think that's really important, and I hadn't ever put it in those words before. But I mean, literally, like, it's like that show 24, where each episode is real time, 1 hour, right? I mean, like, we are taking it a few verses at a time. This is the longest day in the history of the world. And so it really, that put into words really well what I've been feeling in this series. And part of that, that's part of the reason why musically and liturgically I've tried to keep things like more simple and more like easily digestible, because Mitchell, you're bringing so much meat in your sermons every week.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no other way to do it, right? I mean, I don't think you could layer, whether that's Phil or Keith or Josh or whoever, or Rebecca doing the pastoral prayer, right? That even has to be, I appreciated Keith yesterday breaking it up with both lament and gratitude, because it's just, we need it, because we're not getting it in our scripture text. Even the first readings are still, they're not like, they're still connected to the second reading, right? And so we're just kind of, I wouldn't say we're stalling in the sense that like something's wrong. We're just not moving in a pace that we're typically used to moving through worship series. And so I appreciate both the folk band brings not that the songs aren't deep or, Oceans isn't like grounding us in a reality that's hard to live in. It's just, the folk band, even their presence is just a nice shift, right? And so the liturgy kind of has to dance around, or at least like reveal something different, because we're not getting it out of the text, because it's just one of those series, which ultimately I think is a good thing for us. I'm not saying we made a mistake by choosing this. I just think it's different than how we normally approach worship
It
series.
certainly is. And I wanted to read what Jill commented. I think because of it not moving forward fast, it makes me feel like I'm really in the midst of it. And I think that gets at something really important too.
Yeah.
Because each preacher this series, right? It's not just you, Mitchell, but like you said, Phil
Yeah.
and Josh and Keith have also preached in Lent. We've been invited in as spectators and as characters in the story. Right? So we identify with Peter for sure. And more problematically, how do we identify with Judas or Pontius Pilate? Like, how do we put ourselves in the place of entering the story instead of just reading it like it's rote? I think we say this at Christmas a lot. Oh, we've heard this story so much. It just, we can recite it by memory, but do we really listen to it? And I think this is another example of that. These stories in Mark and especially John, we've heard them so often. Do we really listen anymore?
Yeah.
Look, everyone talked about how great Mel Gibson's Passion was, right? And there was something to be said about it. It gave
everyone.
It was a big deal. Remember how
it was a big
it was?
Deal.
It was a big deal. And I think part of it was because it was so graphic, right? And for some folks, that was a positive thing because they'd never really thought about the graphic nature of the event. For others, it was too literal, and it freezes that story now with these scenes, right? I think the challenge is always, though, when we look at the story from that perspective, we become consumers and observers and spectators to Jesus's crucifixion. And that really is not historically what the church has been after. The Gospels were not written as so they could just be heard and consumed. They were written to inspire dramatic change, and within a person and within a community. And this is particularly important for the text we read for this Sunday, because no one would have created a story about Peter like that. That was not what was happening in antiquity. That was the most anti-hero, desperate, non-resolution, right, unfolding of a story ever. That's not how stories were written, and so there was no other reason for the story to be written that way than to pull us into the story and recognize our place there. And I think it's really important that we do that. Now, we can't always do it in the Gospels, because the Gospels, as one of my friends has told me, the Gospels are increasingly not written for us as privileged folks, but they are written so we can see ourselves in the kind of systems or the institutions that we're a part of. And Peter is a good example of where we can insert ourselves, because as much as Peter gets a bad rap, anyone really want to say that they would stand up and also volunteer to be crucified alongside Jesus, right? I doubt that that's really anything we're after. So I think that's the challenge of the text, and why that story is invitational is because it was meant to be. It's not accidental that we find ourselves in it.
Okay, so I'm getting my Lenten things confused. Phil, was it in our 40 days of reflection where we talked a little bit about Peter must have asked his denial to be included in this story? Because what an unflattering thing, right? But it shows up in multiple Gospels. And so Peter, as a voice of the new church, of the infant church, was saying, no, put that in. I want people to know Jesus would forgive me and transform that.
Yeah, I don't remember we had that conversation as well, but yes, I think that might have been the case. That might have been the place we did it. And yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for Peter to have influence in this. And then the conversation came up too, and I can't remember if it was in Bible study or what, of imagine if Judas would have had the same response as opposed to him taking his own life, according to at least one of the Gospels. What a powerful testimony it would have or could have been, and you have this real stark contrast in between Peter and Judas, and what the response can be based on our own failure, and that's a pretty powerful lesson to dive into as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just talking about dwelling on and not dwelling in a bad way, but just sitting in it, right? Staying in it. I'm reminded of what Reverend Joshua Manning said last week. That so often we focus on being people of, why did I just lose my mind? Resurrection. Good Lord, Easter, it's coming. We're not there yet. See, I'm still stuck so much in the mud. I can't even think of the word resurrection. That we often, especially during Holy Week, skip over like the Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and just want to get to the resurrection piece. And what this series has almost forced us to do is to sit in that way longer than just the Holy Week experience. And I think that's what the original purpose of Lent really truly was. And we're such a fast-paced society that we don't sit in anything very long, right? Like we even joke about not liking doing series that are more than 4 weeks long at White Rock because we want to keep moving and go to something new. And I don't want to say countercultural because people say that all the time, but like this really has been an adjustment on the psyche. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but like having to continue to go back to this. Even before I was trying to write a description for the podcast this morning, and I was like, I feel like we're saying the same thing over and over again. Like it was a bad thing.
Because we are.
We are, right? Yeah. Like we exactly are. Yeah.
And paired with the like year we've had, right? It almost feels like, we could have done ourselves a bit of we're doing ourselves a bit of a disservice by sitting in more muck after the year. But the truth is, I think like what this series does is it helps us see where we've been and holds a mirror up to our reality, right? That like we've both been complicit and participating in like, things that have really challenged our world. And we've also been the victim of a pandemic that is, totally been outside of our control. And so it's a nice pairing in the sense that it's mirroring our experience, right? At least like this past year feels the closest to like a long Lent as I've ever had, right? Like
it would be easy.
I think we've talked about like that's why we haven't given anything up because like
right.
I'm not giving up one more thing. We've been giving up way too much.
And it would be easy to just like to embrace like this toxic positivity aspect too, right? And just be like, let's ignore what's happening around and let's just have a really happy-go-lucky. Like I even questioned
whether about denial, Phil.
I see what you did there, Mitchell. I see what you did there. Well, I even like questioned like the first day of spring was International Day of Happiness as well, and I ended up making a post on our social media about it because I thought it almost doesn't feel appropriate given the season that we're in and what we're experiencing right now. Like again with the violence against the AAPI community, like all this stuff, it almost felt. But then I thought like, well, this is the reality of who we are as people, right? Is that we hold both of these things so often together where even in the midst of Lent, in the midst of like this season of lamenting where so many of us are and grief, like in the midst of heavy grief for so many of us, there still is happiness, right? It's not like it's one or the other, but there's always this holding in tension, and that's kind of the craziness of human nature is that we always are holding a balance of a multitude of emotions and feelings and experiences. And so like I finally convinced myself like, yeah, no, like there is, if you walk outside, flowers are blooming, and like there's beauty in that even amidst the grief. Thanks be to God.
Yeah, thanks be to God. Amen. I think we talk about this book a lot on this podcast. Maybe we just need to like straight up do a podcast on this book. But Barbara Brown Taylor's Learning to Walk in the Dark.
Well, I'll call her and see if she wants to get on the pod.
Right? Can we do that, please? That has really been speaking to me the last few weeks because she talks in there, and this goes back to Victoria's Children's Time too. It can get really tiring to be in the bright light all the time. I think she calls it something like neon Christianity or like iridescent Christianity or something like that. It's blinding. It's tiring, right? If you're in bright lights all the time, especially if you work in an office building, for example, the darkness is almost a relief because and I know people who grieve feel this way too. It's almost like people will ask you how you're doing for about the first month after you lose somebody or you have some big grief. And they when they ask, they don't really want to know. They just want you to say, oh, I'm fine. And it gets exhausting to pretend to be happy when you're not. And it's almost relieving to be in a space where you're allowed to grieve, you're allowed to feel sad, you're allowed to like process those things. So I wonder if in some sort of paradoxical way, right? We talked about paradox last week. This series is giving people permission to feel kind of murky and unsure, instead of the tiring, like, oh man, I have to gear up because I have to get my kid's birthday party ready and I don't want to do it, but I have to, and I don't know, that just came to me like this is a really necessary place for us to give ourselves permission to be joyful, not necessarily always happy.
I agree. I was about to say the same thing, right? The distinction between joy and happiness is important here. And I think we've seen this kind of what you just said, Rebecca. I think we've seen this revealed over the past year. Like there has been a slowing down of the frantic nature of our lives. And I think like the franticness that we like live with is a way of like trying to keep the neon lights on all the time, right? And we have to portray that, and we have to post about that, and we have to make sure that people know that how busy we are, and we get to lament it publicly, like I'm just so busy, and then we like don't stop, right? The truth is, like the past year. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and if you don't post that you've gotten your second dose, have you really been vaccinated, right?
Right, totally.
Poster, it didn't happen, right? Because everybody's like, so grateful, my life is going to go back to normal. But is it? Like,
right? Probably
not, at least not immediately.
Well, and if your life goes back to normal the minute you've been vaccinated, then you've been living essentially a pretty self-serving life, right? Because like so much of normal must, for I think like a healthier perspective in the world would be like, well, I still can't gather in the kind of communities that have given me grounding and a sense of purpose, right? So like I like this idea of darkness being relief. Plus, I hate really sunny days. It's just like,
we know,
maybe it's the foreignness in me, but like if I could live in like Seattle or dreary England, it would be like the best, because like I actually appreciate the contrast of light in kind of a cloudy day. All that to say is the challenge, I think, is to see that there still is movement, and giving people the subtle reminder that is happening without overshadowing what we need to be about, is what being stuck in this story. There is something happening in these 24 hours, even if the pace doesn't align with our own notion of success or positive transition. There is something deeply happening. And I think, like we kind of touched on in my sermon, it's Jesus revealing that Jesus is ultimately in control here, slowly over time, right? Like Jesus remaining silent in front of the Sanhedrin, like that is all about Jesus is exerting power. Peter's denial being really about Jesus's prophecy that he's going to deny him is a reminder that Jesus is ultimately in control. And that's where we can extract some of the good news to like sustain us through this, that this is ultimately Jesus's choice, right? Jesus made this choice at Gethsemane. It was his choice to make. We believe that, right? In relationship to God, Jesus makes this choice and enters into this space where Jesus reveals ultimate control, which we get the end of that by Jesus showing us that even death is not the final say. Jesus has the last word. It's still just kind of hard for us to see when we're talking about Jesus being like arrested and beaten and Peter leaving him. And, now he's going to go in front of Pontius Pilate next week on Palm Sunday, and it's going to be more of the same, right? And I think, it kind of slows us down.
I think we as a culture, maybe I've never lived in another culture besides American culture, so I don't want to speak for other parts of the world. It's very hard not to be drawn into the either or of any given story, right? Yeah. And so I think for me, what's important to remember is we need to, and we should, and we can, and we are living in this muck, I think, as you said, Mitchell, of the Lenten stories. To completely ignore it is unhealthy denial. Also, to completely bury ourselves in it without looking for this good news and this hope, that misses the point as well, right? And so we walk this fine line between we're not living in denial, but we're also not like flagellating ourselves in hopelessness, because we are an Easter people. That's part of our heritage, is that we say we are an Easter people.
Absolutely. And there's only one crucifixion that can save us, right?
Yeah.
We must die to ourselves, but we don't have to die in the same way. And we're invited to let go of things in a much more gracious way than what Jesus does on our cross. It reminds me of the folks that like actually, put them bound themselves up on a cross to try to invoke that feeling of desperation and pain. And while there may be something beautiful about the extreme self-denial that folks will enter into during the Lenten season, it is important, Rebecca, to I think you're right on here. Like, we have to be reminded that there still is something good happening here, and there was only one crucifixion that ultimately redeems us and the world, and it's not our own.
That's a good word.
Right. Yep. We can't save ourselves. And thanks be to God for that.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah. Well, this is a little bit of a preview. We're a couple weeks early, but it's on my mind because the choir is recording our Easter anthem this week. And I just wanted to bring forth this text. One of the lines is, death could not hold me because love is what owns me. And even just saying that, I got goosebumps. Like, I have literally sung this hundreds of times as I've recorded and taught and everything, but it still gives me goosebumps to hold on to that truth. Yeah.
It's a beautiful reminder.
Yep.
And one we need right now, right?
Right. And it is that hope, right? It's giving us that little glimpse of hope. And it makes me think, like, what is our resurrection as a country, as a people? Like, the pandemic that we're facing of COVID-19, the pandemic of racism, like, are there bits of hope that we're seeing that we can cling to, and not only just cling to for our own mental health, but then like cling to that is going to put us into action and really start to build and work off of. And I think the answer is yes. Like, those things are out there, and I do find great hope in that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, friends.
Whew, okay, take a deep breath and let's all go take a nap.
This was a good day's work.
Good day's work. So next week, Palm Sunday. A reminder, as Rebecca said, there will be an opportunity for you to engage in helping us decorate the chicken wire heart out front, and just swing by and pick up a palm this weekend and put it in that heart. And Sarah, you do need a nap.
That's fair. You have a newborn,
but that's okay. You're a new mom, so that you're gonna need a nap. Take it. Take your naps.
Any chance you can get.
And then this next Sunday is Palm Sunday, which traditionally has been a really big Sunday for us, with a bunch of kids running around the sanctuary with palms, and we kind of do this dance of like the Sunday before Holy Week, and hold that tension. And it'll be a little different this year, obviously, but there's still that opportunity to participate. And I'm looking forward to Holy Week's going to be really good. We were just on a meeting. We just were having a meeting before this podcast about the details on Holy Week, and Rebecca has done a really great job crafting some stuff that I think is going to be powerful. So we stay in this space for a little bit longer.
Yep.
All right, friends. Take care, everybody.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah. Great to be with y'all.